I'm Jonathan Guy, and I'm here today to talk about my new book, Search Never Sleeps.
And I'm Andy Simpson. I'm the content manager at Aqueous Digital. And I'm going to start there, John, because we're recording this in the same week that the agency is about to mark its 12th anniversary. And if I'd said to you when you were starting the company a little more than a decade ago that you would write a book about search engine optimization, what do you think you would have said?
I would have said you're mad. Genuinely, I mean, they say there's a book in everybody, but honestly, most of them should stay there. There was never any intention really to write a book. That was the whole starting point. I didn't mean to write a book, but so many people ask the same questions whenever I do a talk, a presentation, and those questions become really the framework around which the book hangs, which is why should we be doing what we're doing, well, what's important in SEO, because it's such a broad subject. You can spend the rest of your life immersed in it and still come out none the wiser. So how do we distill that down to something which anybody with a website can actually make sense of? That's really where it came from.
Why now then? What's the catalyst to have sat down and started to write this? Well, not now, it's been
it's a 2 year journey. It's 2 years. And the reason was, and I blame fully Christian, our marketing manager, who's watching in the corner here, because he asked me if I'd write a few words for our website.
Right.
And he asked me, could you do a short piece on the 3 rules of Google, which I formulated back in 2012 and have been using for the last 10 years. And so I did. I wrote a few words, which turned out to be 5,000, which was way too much for a blog post. But then he sort of said, well, actually that might make a good ebook if you could just bulk it out a bit. Anyway, 2 years later, 100,000 words, about 120,000 words later, 20,000 of which we've got rid of because there's too many, we're left with a book which is sort of hopefully something which people will be able to grab off a shelf and dip into as and when they need it, because it's completely accessible and written in plain English. That's the trick.
You mentioned the word people there. So in terms of audience, who have you kept in mind while you've been writing over the past 2 years?
Everybody who's ever asked me a question about SEO.
And that's abroad.
That's a broad church. Pretty much anyone who owns a website needs to understand what search engine optimization is all about. And you can't really run a business in this country today without having a website. It's rare to find businesses that don't have a website of some description. So if you accept that they have to have a website, the next thing they'll want to know is, well, how do I make sure my website comes up in Google when somebody is actually looking for me? And that's where this book is firmly aimed, because whilst there's lots of great resources out there that will tell you how to do the various bits of SEO, most of them miss the why and the what's in it for me. And I've kind of turned it around, and it's really centered around people. It's around how people will react to websites and what people are looking for. And it's quite straightforward really, which is you and I and everybody else out there ask billions of questions every day of Google. And Google needs to produce the right answer in under half a second, and a range of right answers as well. Well, how's it going to do that? That's the why behind it. And I explain that in more detail in the book.
How would you like them to read it? And what I mean by that is it's something that it's front to back, can they dip in and out? How have you kind of put it together?
Well, it's structured in such a way that it's a flowing narrative, which means you can read it as a book.
Okay.
You can read it start to finish, cover to cover, if you wish. And I would encourage anybody buying the book to actually do that first. Start at the beginning, work your way through it. When you get to the end, you will know more than you did at the start. But what you'll also have throughout, I'm sure, loads of bookmarks. You'll have folded page corners over all the way through, because there's bits in there you'll think, oh yeah, right, I can do that. Yeah, right, I need to remember that, or that bit's important.
Yeah.
And so once you've read it, you can then dip in. But if you bought it because you only want to know about link building, for example, you can just go to the bit on link building and read that bit. Again, you'll make notes, you'll make bookmarks. So yeah, however people want to use it, that's up to them.
Okay.
The idea is it's a flexible enough resource that you can read it just as a book. And in fact, people who know nothing about SEO, who I've given the book to originally to read, just for a review, have come back and said, actually, kind of makes sense, this. I didn't think I was going to enjoy this, but I actually did, because it made sense all the way through and it didn't confuse me. And that for me was a huge, huge bonus, because I've spent 2 years, as I say, whittling down so that people can grasp without too much technical jargon what this is all about.
Now, I've asked you there what the book is. Can you talk a little bit about what it isn't so that we can manage expectations?
Okay, so what it isn't is a how-to guide. So what I don't do, for example, is I don't say, right, so if you want to build links, this is what you do step by step, because there's no point.
Okay.
Link building and content and all the rest of it, it changes so rapidly. Search engine optimization changes. Google moves the algorithm 4 times a day on average. Tiny tweaks most of the time, but it still changes it. And because of that, anything I write today and put in print is likely to be out of date in 3 weeks' time. So because of that, and because there's so many great resources online, there's a resources section at the back of the book that says, if you want to know physically how to do this, now you understand why it's important and what you should be doing. If you want to go and do it yourself, that's the resource to go and look at. And that will shortcut the process for a lot of people, because when you do go online and look up certain things, there's so many different things you can read. And lots of them are conflicting bits of interest as well, because not everybody agrees. So I've tried to whittle them down to, well, these are the best of the best, if you like.
Primarily then, what are the headline things you hope readers take away?
Interesting. I hope they take away the 3 rules. The 3 rules of Google, because if you remember the 3 rules of Google, you won't go far wrong. You'll always have in your mind the reason behind why you're doing what you're doing. That's the important bit, I think.
What have you enjoyed most about it?
That's a very good question. I'm not sure it was enjoyable. There were points, actually, to be fair, there were points where I felt like I was wading through treacle.
Okay.
It was awful. But I kept going, because you have to keep going. And the bits I enjoyed looking back is the research part, which is making sure that what I have in my head as the right answer actually is the right answer. And in some cases, some of the stuff I formulated, as I say, 10 years ago, I needed to go and verify and test against modern day thinking, just to check, is this still right? Does this still work? And that I really enjoyed, because it was stress testing my theory, and it still holds true. So when you get the book, the 3 rules of Google still holds true.
Now, you mentioned that there's been spells where it felt like wading through treacle. So how did you keep focused? How did you keep going then?
It was very important for me to understand that I needed to finish it at a point in time.
Okay.
And we set arbitrary deadlines, if you like, to do that. But then by breaking it into smaller chunks, by saying, I'm going to complete 500 more words today, come hell or high water, I was able to get through it. And ironically, even though there were days when I wasn't very productive, and days when writing didn't come easily, it came quite hard, in fact, by simply putting those thoughts on paper, it moved me one step closer to the goal that I was trying to get to. And when I got to the end of that chapter, and then we reviewed it and edited it, in some cases we took out a day's worth of work, because it wasn't good enough, it didn't make the cut. But the fact that it was in there was what was needed to get to the better bits, if you like. So sometimes you get this block and you have to get through it, and the only way to get through it is just to keep going.
Any advice then for first-time authors who are about to sit down and write their first book?
Yes, have a plan, get a really good editor on your side, and set a timescale for it. Oh, and keep going.
Now, we should talk about the title, Search Never Sleeps. For the people who don't know, where's that come from? What's the background?
Well, Search Never Sleeps is 2 things, really. The first one came from a talk I was doing about 10 years ago, and I was asked a question about Google, and as part of the answer, I was explaining that it moves so quickly that it changes, the algorithm updates and so on and so forth. And at that time, they were having big changes with the penguin and panda updates, which
Yeah.
Google introduced, which you'll find out about in the book if you read it. And I explained to somebody that, frankly, search never sleeps. It also goes around the globe 24 hours a day, which means that no matter where you are, you can always access Google, and you can always ask it any question you like, and you can always get an answer out of it. So there was that part of it, and because of that, then the next part, which is that even by the time I finished the book, which was January of this year,
Yeah.
I believe, put it to bed in January, and it was with the editor and the typesetter, and we were starting work on putting the formal structure together. Even then, I've had to write something for the preface, which demonstrates that search never sleeps, because ChatGPT came out and the explosion of AI right at the beginning of 2023, which I hadn't even mentioned in the book. It's 2 years of writing, and it didn't mention AI once. It mentioned large language models and machine learning, but I didn't mention AI. And so I've had to put something in there to say, well, look, this is another example of how search never sleeps, because right now it's being folded into Google and folded into Bing and Yahoo. So all of the major search engines are now starting to use AI capability within the results that they're producing.
Let's finish then by bringing it right up to the present moment and describe for us what it's like now, just before publication. Which emotions are going through your mind?
There's a bit of anxiety, because you never know if someone's going to like what you've written. It could be an enormous flop. If the worst comes to the worst, it'll be a great giveaway for all the talks I'm going to do. People will be queuing up to be given these free books, but I'm hoping above all else that people will like it, and they'll take it to their hearts and say, actually, this is a really good book, and it's one that should be there on the shelves, because it does add value. It takes it a step further than it's ever gone before, and that's really what I'm hoping for. So yes, I'm anxious, I'm slightly nervous, and of course there's that moment of self-doubt,
Yeah.
when you wonder whether or not you should have bothered in the first place. But looking back on it, I think, yeah, I'm glad I've done this. I'm really glad I've done it. And I'm hoping it helps people, because that's all I ever set out to do, was to help people.
Last question, what's your next book going to be on?
Ironically, stamps.
Oh, there you go.
There you go.
There you go. I didn't know what answer I was going to get there.
But that's a long-term project. That'll be another 10 years in the making. So yes, there is a plan to do something in that arena, stamps and philately, but that will be at least a decade away.
Got an exclusive there. Brilliant.